Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where it is that you're tuning in from today. My name is Mariangeli Marval, and I wanted to welcome you to today's Stage 32 Next Level webinar. For all Stage 32 members, new and old, I wanted to thank you for being part of our family of creatives around the world. So today we're excited to bring you our Stage 32 webinar, Understanding the Economics of Distribution Deals with Streamers like Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu with Tiffany Boyle. So let me brag a little bit about our instructor today. Tiffany Boyle is the president of packaging and sales at Ramo Law, where she works with attorneys to review, collaborate, develop, submit, and supervise creative material on behalf of clients within the firm. She has worked on over 100 films and television shows, and a fun fact is that she discovered the feature film Chick Fight from a writer who pitched it on Stage 32. And Chick Fight was released in theaters and on Amazon Prime in 2020. So an amazing instructor we have here today. And before we start, I just wanted to go over a couple of things with you all. So first, this is live and it's an interactive webinar. So what that means is that you can ask questions at any time on the question box. So we can go over them during the Q&A session at the end. So I'll walk you through how to do that right now. So what I want you to do now is to take a look at the control panel that is up on your screen and locate the blue bar that says questions. Pop out that box and you'll see what it looks like a chat box where you will be able to type in your questions. So let's go ahead and give this a try right now. And I'm interested to find out where all of you are from. So what I want you to do right now is to type in what city or what country you're from and that question box so I can make sure you all know how to use it. So let's see. Oh, amazing. It looks like we have people from Brooklyn, Cleveland, Australia, California, Italy, Atlanta, Sydney, Denver, Westport, Albuquerque, Boston, Montana, Manhattan Beach, Canada. All right. From all over. So we're happy to have you all here. And also, we love to be social on Stage 32, so we would love to see your posts. If you learned something today, please share it on social media and tag Stage 32 on Twitter and Instagram. And one last thing before we start, Tiffany is going to go over a lot of information today. If you feel like you missed something, don't worry about it because we at Stage 32 record our webinars. So about 48 hours after this live webinar, we will be sending you a link to view on-demand version of today's webinars through your Stage 32 account that you can play as many times as you like for up to a year. So now, without further ado, I'm thrilled to present you Tiffany Boyle, hosting today's Stage 32 webinar, and take it away.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing really well today. Sorry for the delay. There were some technical difficulties on my side, but really looking forward to spending some of the afternoon with you and giving you some of the information on what I'm kind of seeing for the economics of streaming deals in today's market and how it's working and how our clients are kind of getting to the streamers at this time because it is constantly changing. And then happy to answer any questions that you have at the end. Sometimes I talk a little fast. I'm going to try and slow it down today. And then we'll, just be able to hopefully have a little bit more of a conversation as we go. So to start off, I believe everybody can see my screen. It says Economics of Streaming Deals. We'll kind of dive into this further. So right now, I think everybody's noticing this. Every time I sign a new client or I have clients that are trying to sell movies, the first question I get asked is, how do I get into Netflix? Or how do I get into Amazon or Disney Plus, things like that. So, I would say streamers are kind of king right now, and it's a big part of the conversation. It's a big part of, what is considered success in the industry at the moment. And so it's really important to, as much as possible, stay up to date of what's going on with the streamers, how they're adapting, who's getting bought by them, how they're, who they are buying, what changes or decisions they're making. For example, Netflix has started buying theaters. What does that mean, right? I think it's important to do a lot of that tracking yourself as much as possible, and asking questions to other people who you know are in the space to keep getting educated. The thing about the streamers in the industry as a whole, especially right now, is that I would say it's changing faster, and mandates are consistently shifting more than I've ever seen in the industry the past couple of years. Part of that is due to just how quickly the streamers have really changed the game. Part of that is due to COVID and the need to adjust and find the changes and find interesting ways to keep content going. But there's definitely constant shifting. So really things are changing every 3 to 6 months, if not more. So just because you heard something 6 months ago doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same today. There will still probably be key factors that stick, but again, just like getting those nuances and those updates are going to be important for you. So like we're talking about, right, everybody wants a streaming deal, but what does that actually entail, right? Outside of streamers, what are the other distribution options? I would say for the first question, a streaming deal can entail a couple different things. If we're particularly talking about features, it's more and more the case that streamers are funding their own original content. So those days of 5 years ago when streamers Netflix was licensing a movie for a good amount of money for 3 years, those exist, but I'd say they're a fraction of what they used to be. They're really hard to get, and they're much more picky about what they're giving those funds to and what type of project they're giving those funds to. A lot of times I'll get clients that have good films, but maybe they didn't premiere in a big festival, or maybe they don't have big enough cast, and they're really hoping to get a streamer deal. And I always say, hey, it's not something you can count on anymore. Maybe you can get through all rights distributor, a shorter license period from one of these major streamers. But if not, you've got to start looking at other options, because it isn't a guarantee. They are very picky, and it's something where they really care more about owning the content they create than paying somebody money that it doesn't really help them as much at the end of the day, right? So always, if you're making a movie independently, it's really important to have that thought that you may not get that immediate streamer and or that big streamer you're hoping for, and how can you account and recoup your money for your investors or yourself as other opportunities in the event that that doesn't happen. Then there's obviously the big original buys, because you're one of the lucky ones. You're Palm Springs, right? And the movie Palm Springs that premiered at Sundance a couple years ago, and Hulu picks you up for X amount of money. Those do exist. They're very rare, but when they do, they're usually big money. They're usually for the world. They're not really as interested in parceling out per territory or just for the US anymore. They're usually wanting the whole world, and you're really focused on, gosh, I would say like 20 a year is something that makes sense that they're actually doing that with, if that, or ones that are a bit more quietly that they're taking on in that way. So those are the anomalies, and they can happen. Hopefully some of those will happen out of Sundance in the next month or month and a half, and that's another option. And usually they'll take those for a longer period of time. All rights, you're not seeing back end. You're seeing like effectively like 1.3 of the budget that you put in typically, and then you're moving on until the period ends. And then the other option is coming in earlier to them with a package project that they'll care about, and trying to get them fund it as an original for them. That is also very hard, because they tend to want to work with producers that they know. Producers are pretty big for them. They want to feel like they're comfortable to work with them. They don't want to be hands-on all the time. They want to give them money, know it's going to get made, know it's going to be good quality, come back to them and do as little micromanaging as possible. So that's something where you have to go into them with either a producer that they really care about, a director or talent that they really care about, or all three. I think it was like Mike Lee, who's a British filmmaker that has been very well nominated for many Oscars over the years, and he was even saying Netflix won't fund a movie that he wants to do because it wasn't packaged enough. So you have to think about the fact that if they're turning down Oscar-nominated writers and directors, you know, they are also expecting very specific types of packages and very specific quality of packages. The other thing too is they'll often come back and say things like, we like it, but I want to see it when it's shot, and then you're taking some of the risk of what that will look like, right? If they actually will make that offer. And then obviously, like if you're going on the TV side, you can still get a streamer interested. TV's golden right now. It's such a great time for TV. And so going to them usually with a package is important too, unless, in my experience, you have interesting IP that they want, and you can go through somebody they might have like an output deal with, or a deal with like Higher Ground, for example. So those are, you know, those are on the TV side, it's always going to them earlier, not later. Not always, but 99.9% of the time. So outside of streamers, what are other distribution options? There's a lot still. That's the good news. The bad news is not all of them have as much money, but you know, there's typical studios. I'd say, you know, mid-tier distributors, boutique distributors, aggregators. So there are still options for distribution for content. It's varying on what you'll get. It's very much about what is this piece of art that's been made, who's in it, how do they see it fitting in the marketplace, and you're very much beholden to how they see that. And so I always say, do your research before you shoot a film to really get a sense of who are my actual potential distributors at the end of the day. Because if you only have one option, or they're only, you know, ones that you don't feel would benefit you, then maybe you need to rethink your package, or, you know, rethink the type of film you're making, or the genre that you're sticking in, things like that. But, you know, it's everything from some of the bigger studios I'm sure everybody knows, which is like Universal, Warner Brothers, Lionsgate, and then some more of your kind of like interesting independent distributors, or A24, Decal, Bleecker Street, Neon. You've got some more of your boutique distributors. Ones that immediately come to mind are like Good Deed, Tricoast, and it depends on your genre, but there's some good genre ones out there like Vertical and Grindstone, who has a deal with Lionsgate. And then you've got your aggregators, which are more like Gravitas, which Gravitas was just bought by this company called Anthem, Freestyle, that type of thing. So it's really going through all the different possibilities and again, saying, where does my project fit? The other interesting thing about all these distribution companies is the majority of them work with streamers, right? So a lot of the time, if you don't get that immediate streamer buy, what I tell my clients is, okay, find a distributor that can take your all rights. Maybe they do a theatrical, they do a DVD release, they do non-theatrical releases. You know, they do any sort of like prime situation where, you know, you're paying more money up front because they're not doing theatrical, but you get to see it excitingly, right? Like, I don't know if anybody's watched King Richard, but kind of like how they're doing it, where you can watch King Richard on HBO for a month, and then it goes into theaters, and then it's a while before it'll be back, right? So a lot of people are doing interesting models like that right now. And you try and get it on a streamer, maybe for a license versus a big buy. And then there's AVOD, which is really interesting and doing really well right now for a lot of my clients, where it's advertising video on demand, and things like Tubi and Pluto, where there's advertising while you're watching the film, but you're not having to pay for it. And it can be quite lucrative for clients, especially clients that have maybe even older films that have stars in them. The basics of distribution. So we can kind of dive into that. So the basics of distributors, what streamers are out there. They vary by size, you know, how renowned they are, and their specialty, right? So things like Disney Plus is obviously much more family oriented, but they own Hulu. which, isn't always as more family oriented, can be really racy and things like that. And then there's Fox, which tends to be more awards focused, right? So a lot of these big streamers, can also sometimes own other companies, and some of them just are who they are, like in Netflix. So again, doing your research on each of them to say, okay, who plays with who in the sandbox? What are they looking for? That kind of thing. What studios are out there? Some are also streamers now, right? So Disney is a studio, they're also a streamer. Paramount's a studio, also now a streamer. Peacock's a studio, Universal / NBC is a studio, also now a streamer. And then again, we kind of went over this already, but what independent or more boutique distributor options exist? There's a lot out there. I would say there's only a handful that do it really well and that I trust enough. I tend to tell my clients that dealing with sales agents and distribution, no one will ever be fully happy. It's just like what you're willing to deal with, right? Which version of that, frankly, pain are you willing to kind of like take on? Because some people are more, give better reports than others. Some people are more responsive than others. Some people do better marketing than others. Some people have better placement on, platforms than others. And so you'll find that everybody's nuanced, and you kind of have to pick your pros and cons and what's best for you and that particular project, because even if you've loved working with one streamer or distributor in the past, very much what the project is can also be affected in terms of who you're going with. Because if you did a horror movie in your last film and you loved who you went with, and now you did a drama, it doesn't necessarily mean that just because they did a great job with your horror that now your drama is going to do well with them, because they may not be as specialized in that. What's the difference between a project a streamer develops versus acquires? That depends on the streamer. And I'd say that also depends on like the budget and who's involved. But, like if you look at Apple TV's Finch versus Coda, there's one that they kind of developed in-house and one that they bought at the end of things. And so it's really hard to say also, frankly, it's a question I struggle answering for clients constantly, is that streamers' mandates are changing as well every couple of months in my experience. So it can be really hard to know, okay, when do I come to them, and when is the right time? Because they may fill up certain slots that they already had in mind, and you were that sci-fi one that they may have wanted, but you're too late. Or they realize those sci-fi projects didn't work for them, and I love sci-fi, I'm not ragging on sci-fi, but as an example, they may realize it doesn't work for them, and so they've decided to go a different direction. So that's really where I would say when to go to a streamer with something is, if you can and you're packaged well enough, you have a good director, a good producer at the very least, then you go to a streamer. I also think at the very least, you need to think about what your budget is for the streamer you're going with. Certain streamers are not willing to look at budgets below a certain point when they're coming in as an original, and some streamers are willing to work with a more interesting budget or lower budget if it's really good talent. So you need to kind of do more of your research at whatever time period you're at, say who's doing what, who's excited about what kind of material. For example, I know like Apple, they are very supportive of wanting to find more minority content and untold voices. So, if you have stories that are kind of in that range, you're approaching them. That's something that Netflix is really all about too. They just set up like an Indigenous initiative for writers. Disney's constantly doing things like that and helping unknown writers or people of diverse communities enter the market more. So I would also say start looking at these programs that a lot of these streamers are putting out, because I am seeing more and more of that. And it'll not only indicate for you what they might be looking for, clearly they're like, here's a program, hey, I need this, but also it may be a way for you to even enter a certain program if you fit the mold of what they're looking for. And then you can see if you're able to get jobs out of it. Next, okay, so here are a bunch of different streamers, some of the bigger ones. So just so you kind of have a sense, there are actually smaller distributors than this that you've probably never heard of, but these are at least some of the biggest ones. And as you can see, right, there was an Epix, and now there's an Epix Now. Starz has their own streaming. Now Showtime has their own streaming, right? So a lot of them are entering that streamer game. And then here's some niche streamers that I think are really interesting to explore, because I've had a lot of clients, for example, that are in the horror genre space, and they're getting funded movies through Shudder. Shudder is a very well respected, very quality horror streamer that I'm not sure enough people think about, and they also still do buy outside of their original content. So they're one of those like what Netflix was 5 years ago almost, right? But for genre films specifically. So again, like these are just kind of other up and coming options or very niche specific options that you can kind of look into depending on what your project is and what might be the right fit for you. Here's some studio examples. There's more, but of course, you know, some of them will have overlap, right? Like Walt Disney has Disney, Paramount, Paramount Plus, and some of them don't. MGM, for example. And then here are some boutique independent options that I was talking about that I personally think are interesting to, and a different smattering, right? You have kind of like the cool A24, very millennial, looking for interesting projects, and then you have Bleecker Street, which really gears itself more towards, you know, the I guess senior audience and or awards audience, right? And then you have IFC, which does a lot of comedy and horror. So they all have their own specific goals, and Vertical does a lot of horror too, right? So an action and thriller. So again, just kind of digging into who does what. And then all of, just by the way, to go back a little bit, all of these here will sell to streamers. And some of them even do like develop, I think Neon and A24, they'll like develop TV and other movies even with the streamers directly and almost act like a production company / distributor. So a lot of these are doing hybrid situations for their companies. They're getting in the mix in a bunch of different ways. Current state of the world for theatrical, digital kind of marketplaces. So theatrical for 2021, these are just some kind of stats for you. The global market, 20.2 billion predicted in box office sales. Sales projection 58% less than 2017-2019 box office. I don't think that should surprise anybody given what's happening around the world with the global pandemic, but that's kind of where it is in numbers. It's unfortunate, but hopefully it'll be back. Domestic box office made 3.5 billion. 390.5 million tickets sold. Ticket sales decreased 81% from 2019. Super depressing. I personally have only been to one movie since the pandemic started. I have 2 kids. I'm trying to protect them. It's really hard to get out. The movie I saw was at a festival. So I haven't even been into like a public theater since the pandemic started. It's very sad. And I am obsessed with film. So the fact that I haven't made it, I think, says a lot to kind of like what the rest of the world is going through and how they might be making their choices. And it really shows here, right, in the statistics. Action films made up 46.14% of box office earnings. I think that's a really important thing to think about if you're doing a theatrical movie or you want to do a theatrical movie, especially right now since people are more hesitant to go to the theater until maybe the pandemic dies down more or they get their booster shot or whatever it is. You have to think about, okay, I'm doing a film, where's it gonna fit into the marketplace? Not only at which distribution company, but in terms of like genre, who's gonna go see this and in what format, on what platform, right? There's the theatrical, right, which most of the time when people watch a theatrical movie, if they're gonna spend that much money and maybe take the risk to go out there and watch it, they're gonna likely go see those big movies that are gorgeous to see on screen that you're missing details at your home, right? So movies like Dune or big action movies or, you know, those big Marvel movies where it feels like you're in it versus, you know, somebody stuck in their house for 2 hours because they're scared of a ghost, right? or just a drama that's family where, you know, you're talking about depressing things the whole movie. So those they might rather see at home. So you have to think about, okay, how am I placing it, and how is it getting out there? And Action is the one that seems to be doing the best. In 2020, home mobile entertainment market totaled 68.8 billion and increased 23% from 2019. So that's, you know, good for that market, right? And growing revenue. So, you know, revenues theatrical shifting and going up in other avenues. So people and distributors and streamers and things like that are having to adjust for that. And obviously streamers probably, it worked out the best for them because they weren't doing that much theatrical anyway. So they benefited from that versus, you know, the traditional Warner Brothers, who obviously made the Dune changes and things like that, where they were going to do theatrical and then had to shift. 2021, Netflix and Amazon Prime Video are the most popular OTT media service with a combined 350 million subscribers. So I think everybody, that's why most people ask me about Netflix. I'd say that's the top streamer people ask me about versus others. And, you know, I think that obviously Amazon Prime seems to be close second. And they really have the best outreach around the world as well compared to others, except for Disney, in my opinion. So then the domestic market, 2020, digital market total of 30 billion and increased 33% from 2019. Great, because everybody's at home. 2021, 62% of adults subscribe to streaming services, which we subscribe personally to, I think, like 6 of them. It's basically like paying for cable. I think everybody's starting to get into that issue. 2021 streaming population is 60% white, 17% black, 17% Hispanic, and 4% Asian. I think it'll be interesting to see how this changes as they start reaching more global marketplaces. A lot of these streamers who are trying to do those outreach, and as they're doing more content like Squid Game, right? Like how will that shift? Because they're clearly making those decisions to reach the more diverse markets, and how will those shift, and what ways will it help not only the communities but also the way people are watching and who's watching. And I also think it helps, you know, again, like doing your research on who's watching and how you're entering those marketplaces and who they're trying to hit, because you may be able to target your content towards who they're trying to hit, right? Like Netflix doing the Indigenous program. Clearly, they're really wanting to tell stories from Indigenous communities. So if you have true stories in that vein, or you have interesting talent in that vein, writers that you can access, directors where you think, oh, they're super talented, you can really try and push them. Securing a distribution deal. Different distributors have different mandates that are constantly shifting. I talked a little bit about this already. But you know, it's very different in television too, and how you're doing television versus film. A lot of the time I notice that big agencies will get mandates that just kind of come to them from certain, and they'll even create and put them all together. So if you have any friends at agencies where you know they're getting that, ask for it. It's really helpful to at least just track. Some people too will just even track and make their own mandate plan. So I know that there's some people who are just like almost in the movie geek way. They're tracking every article that comes out and saying, okay, Netflix did this now, Netflix did this now, Hulu did this now, and then they did this. And so they'll say, okay, Hulu bought 8 of these types of projects per year. They bought 8 of these horror shows. So horror is really in right now. So I'd say, you know, if you have any friends like that, or if you want to be that person taking on that to really understand clearly these are the mandates that are happening, great. The other thing too is sometimes the mandate doesn't always catch up to the news, or well, no, the news isn't always caught up to the mandate, right? Usually you'll see the mandate, they'll get their mandate, they'll develop the projects under their mandate, and then like 6 months later, they'll announce projects that they wanted in their mandate. So you also have to be thinking about the fact that when something is announced in the trades, you're probably 3 to 6 months behind something that already happened, right? And what a mandate already happened. It doesn't mean that mandate still doesn't exist, but they're clearly filling a pocket of holes from months ago because they may have been negotiating a deal for 3 to 6 months before they could announce it. Or I have a project at a premium channel, a series that we've been working on for a year and nobody's ever announced it. And when they do, it'll look fresh, but really it's been in development and part of the mandate that they had starting in end of 2020, mid 2020 actually. So you have to always kind of remember that too, that even while mandates are shifting and it's looking a certain way in the trades, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's where they're at exactly right now in terms of taking on new content that they haven't seen yet. What makes a project attractive? So we've talked a little bit about this, but you know, I think it's pretty obvious, a high value actor and director. If you look at even like Tick, Tick, Boom, right? You have a piece of IP, you have Lin-Manuel Miranda, and you have Andrew Garfield. So it's like a trifecta, right? You're really dealing with so many of these places that are going to pay big money. It's so important to them to have IP. That can be a true story, it can be a book, it can be a you know, comic book, whatever, but it has to have some sort of success that they find interesting, and you know, a voice that can get behind it in your Lin-Manuel Miranda, and then getting the actor that has sales value. Now, the sales value part of that is all very shifting because like Andrew Garfield has worldwide sales value, but then there's other actors who might only have more like domestic sales value or in certain territories sales value. So you have to really think about and try to get a better understanding of who's built and where. Usually though, if you're already having that discussion and of the actor discussion, you're probably pretty far along with an interesting director and producer to be able to advise accordingly. Partnering with a production company that's an overall first look deal or popular underlying EP. We talked about the IP, but there are, one of the things that I've found super fascinating the past couple of years is that actors are really becoming very savvy in owning their own production companies and really being much more of the driver of what jobs they can get, but also helping other actors or telling stories they want to make as opposed to waiting for the projects to come to them. So, you know, things like Reese Witherspoon's company, Kevin Hart's production company, Viola Davis's production company. There's so many of them out there that are doing really interesting content, and a lot of them have overall deals or first look deals with either the studios or the streamers. So if you have ins to people like that, or even directors or other producers like that, sometimes if the project's good enough, even if it's not based on IP, you can get that sale to them for them to say, okay, I'm going to tailor this and take it to my overall deal or my first look deal. And if that doesn't work out, then we'll talk, kind of a thing. So I'd also say do your research on that, your pod deals and how it all trickles down. And then perceived value of project versus production budget. This is my constant feedback in terms of a lot of people say, oh, I have this really great actor and I want to do this movie for $10 million, but the actor's maybe value is worth like 600 grand worldwide. You really have to do your research before you attach an actor and even a director for that matter to a project to make sure that you're packaging it correctly with where you're trying to lead, right? And then also thinking about what genres are interesting and maybe don't need as much of that big actor, right? Like horror, for example, you don't always need as big of an actor to make it successful because it really can be successful without that big name versus a drama where you kind of need that big name, or it's successful because of execution and much more risky, right? And if you're trying to get that streamer buy out of the gate, you really need to think about that and try and say, okay, I'm going to build it towards more what they cost. Avenues to secure a distribution deal. So, been over this a little bit, but just to kind of get in more, so there's a streamer. So there's different ways to go through to get to a streamer, right? It's really hard if you don't have one of these things to just like call them up and get a phone call back. So, you know, you can go through an agent if you have one, a producer, sometimes like a law firm will do it, or an executive at another company who you have a relationship with that might be able to get through. All of these are going to have to feel like they get the project enough and are willing to put their name on the line enough to get it out there. So I think Sometimes people aren't as respectful about that as they should be, which is they can just say, take this to Netflix. And it's like, no, I mean, we have a relationship there that we have to keep, and I'm going to only take them things so many times a year, and I'm only going to take them certain types of package projects that I think is worthy of their time, so that they keep answering my phone, right? So I think you have to be really strategic about how and when you do that, and also if you're having your agent send it or asking a producer to send it, making sure that you have those conversations with them first, also of like, hey, is this the right time to send it to them? What else can we do to make it interesting for them before we send it to them? Because you probably only get one shot, right? And not just being hasty about getting it to them because you're so excited to get it to them, really making sure you're bringing it to them at the right time and the right stage where they'll really pay attention. And then for studios can also approach streamers, right? So there's a bit of the back and forth of that. But for studios, you would go to them, you know, with somebody that maybe has an overall deal, where a studio compensates the creator company to own the ideas they create under this deal, or a first look deal, which is, you know, potential buyers pay a fee to the writer or producer to have a first look at a new material, and if they don't take it on, they have the ability to go elsewhere, right? So those are other ways to kind of get up there. And then avenues to secure a distribution deal with them. We talked about this obviously already, but aggregators who are experts in formatting and delivering your content to popular platforms, they tend to not do quite as much, and they'll always pitch the main streamers too and try to sell to them too. But I would say that most aggregators are not as much involved in helping market your film. So if you're selling to an aggregator, you need to have an understanding of what that looks like with them more, and then you know, what really are your chances to sell to that streamer, right? And what you're really going to probably get, like have them give you the real on that. And then they'll probably get you like certain types of placements on certain platforms, but again, not market as much. Versus a boutique distributor, they might be more expensive for you, but they'll probably pay more attention to the film, and really, you know, often not be as packaged with other films, which could be a good or bad thing, again, depending on who they are. And then distributors with output deals. I would say the output deal world, especially for streamers, is super rare right now. There used to be, you know, so many people had outputs through major streamers like Netflix, and those just kind of all got cut. They wanted to make the decisions of what they were taking versus having stuff just kind of go on their platforms. So I wouldn't expect for you to get a output deal to a streamer through one of the other distributors unless it's one of the big ones. And then even then, it's not a guarantee. But also then hopefully, right, like if you're selling to Disney, you'd probably get on Disney Plus. If you're selling to Paramount, you'll probably get on Paramount Plus, right? But outside of that, where you have these more boutique distributors, the chances of getting into like an output deal are very low compared to how they were 3 to 5 years ago. How distribution deals work. So there's, I don't know how many people on here have sold a film before, but they're really, these are some of like the big things that I say to look out for distribution deals, and they're relevant to both selling to a streamer and selling to just a distributor in general. And we could talk a little bit about like the economics of what it looks like as well. But territory, like I said, most streamers are gonna really want the world. They will sometimes just take North America or maybe multi-territory, but you really have to flesh that out and make it feel like it works for you. Sometimes what happens is you might not have a sales agent on board your film before you sell it to a streamer. This happened with Coda, I believe. I think they had pre-sold to a couple territories, and then Hulu, I think it was, came in and wanted the world, and then they had to unwind those deals to those territories. And it's very frustrating for those companies that had bought them that have to unwind them because they really wanted that movie, right? And it was like a chance they took on the movie before it was made, or you know, something that they were really excited about. And so that can be complicated, and you have to think about when and how you're selling things, pre versus post, versus if it's really going to be a streamer play or not. to kind of say, am I going to be in those kind of conundrums? And then most distributors like studios also have an avenue to take at least North America, but also multi-territories, right? So like Universal has an ability to do the world. Lionsgate does multiple territories. They have, you know, Lionsgate in the UK. So always just trying to think about, will they have to take other territories? And even independent distributors like Vertical, they have a place in, they have distribution in the UK now too. So again, like just doing your research on who's buying for what territories, what distributors are taking on which territories, both for streamers and for regular distributors is important, so that you're not hopefully having to unwind deals and pay for more money. Sometimes it's worth it, right? Like if you get a $20 million deal on a movie that you made $5 million for, and you're willing to kind of like unwind those deals and pay that extra money, fine. But to unwind those deals, it typically costs you extra money because they're mad and you have to find a way to make them happy. And then for term, I would say for streamers, if they're coming in early, their term, their origination, like it's like an original one, they're taking it, right? Like I don't expect a term conversation. If it's something where they're taking it on after it's been filmed, you know, for them, I'd say anywhere between 10 to 15 years. But again, if they're licensing it, you might be more on like the 3-year one where they're only licensing it versus paying the big money for an original. And then for other distributors that are not in the streamer space where, but then again, to think like, oh, they might go to a streamer later, you're really thinking about anywhere from like 3 years to, I've seen up to 25 to 30 years, depending on who it is. I'm not saying that up to 25 to 30 years is right, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And the other thing to really think about too in terms of the territory and term collectively is there is one territory that tends to take 20 to 25 years, and that's Germany. So sometimes what we'll do in our deals is like, okay, you want the world. And this is less for a streamer because there's just not as much negotiation room on that point, but you want the world boutique distributor. And that's fine, but you want it for 10 to 15 years. You're saying you want it for 25 years. I will give it to you for 10 to 15 years, but I really expect that only Germany is the one you can license for up to 20 to 25 years. So just knowing those different caveats and having somebody help work that through with you. And if you have a foreign sales agent, they should really be the one doing that and helping guide you through that, or an attorney who handles foreign sales deals and knows that world. The rights situation is a key, huge thing right now. It is something that is like always been important, but it's more important than ever. And you know, you definitely need somebody to help you flush out what rights you're giving to people, even in a like you're going with a streamer before you've even shot it. Okay, what rights are you giving them? They're going to want everything. But then there's things like NFTs right now, which haven't been included in deals before and are now starting to be. Do you give it to them? Do you not? There's kind of new laws surrounding what that's going to look like. You really need to think those things through. Even things like remake rights, or I don't know, it might be a musical, or it might have musical elements. How are you working in any music rights with who's buying it and taking it on? There's, you know, it's just the right thing is ever changing, ever evolving, and will continue to be so. So, you know, trying to cover yourself as much as possible so that, let's just say somebody decides they want to do the Broadway rights of this. Do you control those rights and you tell the streamer that you're going to do it? And then maybe they get a piece of the pie because you agree to that with them, or did they control those rights and now you have to beg the streamer to pay attention to it? Those are, you know, really important nuances to making sure that you have a way of getting more money out of this piece of filmmaking or TV making that you've done in order to continue to do more with it. Distribution fee. Again, if a streamer is really funding it from the start, they're not getting a distribution fee, they're funding it, they're getting it, moving on. But if you're selling it after the fact to a streamer, there's not really this distribution fee aspect of it. They're giving you a lump sum of money, they're paying it out quarterly over a certain amount of quarters, and you're kind of beholden to what that looks like, and you know what you're getting, versus if you're going with an all rights distributor who may sell to a streamer down the line, you're usually giving them a distribution fee of anywhere between 25 to 50%, depending on what rights they're looking at. Sometimes they'll break it up where they're like, if we sell to TV, we get 50%, and if we sell to theatrical, we get 50%, but if we do digital, we get 25%, right? And some just do a blanket across the board, 25% to 35%, things like that. But it's really important to really think through, where do you think it's going to go, on what platforms, how much is it really worth, and trying to get that down as low as possible. The other thing to make sure you do on the distribution fee as much as possible is to say you want it inclusive of sub-distributors. Sub-distributors is when, like, let's just say there's a boutique distributor who uses, I don't know, a DVD person. There used to be this like DVD person back in the day who was able to get into all the Walmarts, and so he would charge his own fee, and so to get to Walmart. So you would make sure that you include your percentage of 25% or whatever it is, inclusive of his fee, so that you're not missing out on the 25% plus whatever his fee is. So it's important to think that through. And then the distribution expenses, which, sorry, am I cutting this off and it's flowing? But then there's the distribution expenses, where on top of the distribution fee, they will also charge you expenses for covering costs of marketing the film, of promoting it, of doing any actual costs to create certain materials to put it up, things like that. Again, with a streamer, this tends to be not a thing, because they're just giving you effectively like a fee that they're guaranteeing, and you're not seeing anything more. But with distribution companies, you need to think about how much do you think they're going to spend, what's fair, and trying to cap out those expenses. And then the minimum guarantee versus the license fee versus a straight distribution deal. So minimum guarantee is what a distributor will pay you, saying, no matter what happens with the release of this film, I promise you, you're going to get X amount from me, and I'm going to pay, usually it's like 20% upon execution of agreement and 80% upon completion and delivery. There are nuances to all of that, but that's the general. And then, you know, they'll release the film, they'll recoup their distribution expenses, they'll recoup their distribution fee, they'll recoup their minimum guarantee, and then you'll see any money over that, if any. That's a minimum guarantee. And that's maybe from because they sold it to a Netflix or they sold it to a Shudder, and those are the monies that are coming in too, right? It can be a part of having the streamers be in that conversation. And then a license fee is effectively what like a streamer is giving you. They're saying, this is the film, this is the money we're giving you. You're not going to see anything over this money, but it's good money, take it or leave it. You don't get any back end, you don't get any added things, nothing, just this is what it is for this period of time in this territory. And then a straight distribution deal is the worst out of all of these, but in some cases necessary. And that's basically saying, again, this tends to be more like boutique distributors. Okay, we're not going to give you a minimum guarantee, but we might give you a lower distribution fee, like on the 25% range versus the 35% range. Because of that, we're not going to do as much expenses because of that. But you know, as money's coming in, we'll recoup our distribution expenses, our distribution fee, and then you'll see the funds. Another one that's not on here is what's called a gross corridor deal. Again, you're not going to get this with a streamer. But again, if you have a deal with a streamer, with a distributor, it plays into it, which is why we're talking about it. And that is, okay, I'm not going to give you a minimum guarantee. And sometimes they do, but typically I'm not giving you a minimum guarantee. But I'm saying that for every dollar we get, I'm guaranteeing that even if I haven't recouped my distribution expenses or my distribution fee, that you're going to see 10 cents of that dollar. And that's a way to feel comfortable that, like, even if the movie doesn't do as well as you'd hoped, or they spend a lot of expenses and things like that, you know you're going to at least see 10 cents for every dollar. A lot of distributors are hesitant to do that type of deal, but we have done it with some, And it just depends on the kind of like what your goals and expectations are as to whether or not something like that is really worth it. And then obviously, like you're kind of hearing from me, different distributors equals different deals. They all have different payment terms and payment plans. And like, I couldn't even begin to get into all of those today. And frankly, like they're changing constantly too, that like what I tell you now won't be the same in like 6 months anyway, because they may decide to change how much they're paying or for how many years. But you just have to know going into it that like, yes, there can be generals, but there are nuances to every company. And every streamer does it a little bit different. Every distributor does it a little bit different. Every aggregator does it a little bit different, and that you have to kind of learn or hire an attorney or an agent or a foreign sales agent or a rep that's really going to know those nuances and those consistently shifting nuances to be able to say, this is what it should look like. For example, right, like our firm does 30 distribution deals with this company called Gravitas every single year, and they were just bought out by Anthem. Well, it's my job and other people at the firm's job to make sure we understand the fact that they were bought out. Is that changing anything for our current clients that are with them, and also future clients that are wanting to do distribution deals with them, so that we know how it might change the deal or not, and so we can advise accordingly what they should be doing. And then obviously, like I said before, just because you have a deal with one company for a certain type of genre project or certain cast of project does not mean it's the right fit for the next one. It's all about, you know, what is the genre, who is in it, what type of deal does it need, and based on the offers you're getting, who is the right fit. And that is pretty much it. I would like to thank everybody for paying attention. I know that was a lot to cover. I think like economically, right, just to kind of like finish the full thought in terms of what streamers are really paying economically. My answer isn't easy. I told Amanda that when we talked about doing this is because, again, it's constantly changing. And secondly, like you'll see movies that Will Smith's doing with Netflix for $90 million. And then you'll see streamers that are paying 100 to 300 grand for a license fee for a small genre movie. So there isn't this like easy way to talk about what the economics of this is going to look like. It's very, very much dependent upon what your film is, who's in it, when it comes out, and how it hits the marketplace and who's excited to see it. So that's it.
All right, that was amazing. Such an interesting topic, Tiffany. And thank you for that. I just wanted to remind everyone that this great webinar was recorded. So if you missed anything, don't worry. We'll be processing the video and you can find the replay in your Stage 32 account in your purchase history in about 48 hours. So yeah, we're gonna start the Q&A, and I have great questions over here. And this first one is, when Netflix funds, do they fund 100%? Do they like packages with budgets under 10 millions, or what are their parameters?
So I will probably always preference every one of these questions with it could change tomorrow. But currently, and like from the last conversation I had with them, they prefer 10 million and up right now budgets. It doesn't mean they won't look at stuff smaller, but it really has to be the right package. When they fund, they're typically funding the full budget, even the tax incentives. Sometimes, and I have had this happen, sometimes they will fund, like use somebody else to fund the tax incentive, but that doesn't really help them that much. They might as well do it. So typically, they're not really looking for outside investors to fund and then their names on it, right, as the streamer. Again, there are nuances to that. There are some companies that they're willing to entertain that conversation with, but it's not many. And did I answer? Sorry, I felt like there was another piece of that conversation that I didn't finish answering.
Yeah, I mean, she was just saying about, yeah, the budget's under 10 million, and just in general, if they fund 100%, or what are they parameters?
They're typically funding 100%. And yeah, like I said, they'll do budgets under 10 million, but it's got to be the really right thing. They tend to look for 10 plus.
Okay, perfect. Yes, and I C, do you think approaching a streamer with an award-winning screenplay makes sense?
If you don't have, if this is award-winning screenplay and that's all you have on it, no. I think you need to build up the package a bit more. You know, obviously if it like wins Blacklist or Nichols, maybe. And if it's maybe also based on a true story or a piece of IP, maybe. But I just don't think you're going to get the kind of attention you need on it until you get at least a producer that they care about, and hopefully even more like a director and actor that they care about.
Right. And question about people playing in the same sandbox. So for example, 20th Century Studio is owned by Disney. Does that mean if they option something, it will only get made if it is to be streamed on a Disney platform?
No, it's a good question. No, it doesn't. Typically it means that most of the time that's how it will work out, right? But it doesn't mean that that's the only way it will. And they're constantly still figuring out like how. I talked to a Fox exec around AFM, and he was saying that like now Fox is starting to help buy for Hulu, and like Hulu has this whole new team, and so things are constantly changing, and all these places personnel are constantly changing, and so you know, yes, you'd probably be more in that family if you were bought by one of them, but it does not necessarily mean that they couldn't sell it and it ends up on like HBO Max or something.
Awesome. And which distributor or streamer do you think will be best to research for an Afro-futuristic sci-fi series?
Sorry, for a what?
Afro-futuristic sci-fi series?
It's hard because I don't feel like I have enough context of what that project is to say. Sci-fi people are interested in, it depends on like what kind of tone of sci-fi it is, if it's more grounded or not, how big the world is, because if the bigger the world, the more expensive, and if it's not based on IP, that's harder. If it's a really big world, if it's more grounded and it's not based on IP, that's easier. But obviously like sci-fi is a place to go. And then I'd say like Netflix seems to be more open to the sci-fi space. And then Apple clearly likes some of the, you know, they did the, I think it was called C, about the blind guy in the futuristic world. And then they just have that new one, Foundation, as well. But again, if it's not based on IP, it might not be easy enough for them to take on because sci-fi can tend to be such a big world.
And is it better to try to get a deal before filming, or is it okay if you shoot the pilot or pilot presentation before trying to get a distribution deal?
That's also a very good question. I think that the majority of the time you're wasting your money if you shoot a pilot. There are a handful of ones that have had success by doing that, maybe because they premiere in a Sundance and it gets picked up. But even though if you go and I would suggest, just go look at like pilot episodes that have premiered in the past main festivals like Sundance, Toronto, Tribeca, things like that, and just look at ones that premiere there that were already bought and made like before the pilot was made, or didn't have a buyer premiere at the festival, and see if they got picked up. Because you'll find that maybe there was like one per festival, which is low when you think about the majority of movies, even if they don't get a streaming release, at least find distribution. So I tend to say like maybe if you want to do a teaser because you think that makes sense, or maybe you're doing like a docu-series and therefore it makes a little bit more sense to show like the vibe of the people. But if not, and it's more of a scripted series, then my suggestion is have a really amazing Bible, have a really amazing pilot, and then try and find the voice that is, you know, almost like the showrunner, or go to an actor-owned production company. For example, we've had success where we have a couple projects that are based on IP or true stories, and we've gone to like Peter Dinklage's production company, he's come on, or Sofia Vergara's production company, or Rebecca Ferguson, Johnny Galecki's production companies, William Shatner's production company. So those all help validate the project and elevate it and make it feel to streamers, networks, studios that they can pay more attention to it, because it's got the talent already, and or that's a director-owned production company, right? Like, or a pod production company. I would say look more into that.
Right. And how can we get representation with your firm?
You can feel free to email, I forget her name. I mean, I can give you my email and I can let you know if we can be helpful. My email is tiffany@ramalaw.com. And if you just send an email like, here's what I'm needing, I can let you know how we work and if we can help.
Great. Okay, this is an interesting question. If I get pre-sales based on a specific actor, what happens if they back up or if I have to fire them for some reason?
Well, question back at you. Have you already started shooting, or is this like before you shoot?
Got it. Yeah, he doesn't say yet.
I'm assuming it's before you shoot. I'll take it from that, because if you're already shooting, it's much more complicated. But I would say if for some reason they are off and you already have pre-sales, I'm literally going through this on a project right now where we lost an Oscar-nominated actor, and we're bringing in another great actor but doesn't have that nomination. We had a $1.5 million pre-sale to a distributor domestically, and they're going like, this actor doesn't mean as much, but you need to fill in the other actors with other names. So my take is always, okay, you have these pre-sales, you lose an actor that had certain value, you can go back to those, work with the sales agent and go back to those distributors to say, who else do you like that we can fill in, that we can try and get? Or another thing I've seen done is, usually when you close with a distributor or from either a sales agent in a certain territory, they'll say like, this cast is pre-approved. You might be able to do something where you get a list of names that they pre-approve as well. So if that actor falls out, you have these 10 other names you already know you can go to.
I see. And you haven't spoken about documentaries specifically. Is it easy enough to make a blanket statement about the current documentary market, or if you have any particulars that you can address easily enough, please do. Thanks.
I mean, a lot of these comments apply to documentaries and docuseries as well. We do a ton of docuseries and documentaries. Like we did Production Legal on Val, the Val Kilmer one. We did the Dionne Warwick documentary. We did the Billie Eilish documentary. And then for docuseries, we do like Cheer and Chef's Table and Goop. So I would say a lot of these things apply the same. Like as you can hear, right, the majority of these have huge star attached of some sort. Goop is Gwyneth Paltrow. Val's Val Kilmer, Billie Eilish, right? So like that, you have this huge star attached that they care about. Or in the case of Cheer, you know, the people who are working with them are a production company that Netflix just loves and did Chef's Table with and really trusted them, and so trust their taste. And then Chef's Table, that was based off of a documentary that we actually did some legal on that's called Euro Dreams of Sushi, which was a really great documentary that premiered in Sundance. I think it was Sundance in Berlin or Berlin. And so then the filmmaker of that created kind of like the docuseries that Netflix then picked up with the production company. So it's somewhat the same, right? Like it almost had an IP-based structure in that way. And then working with a production company that everybody trusts and knows. So even if you have this documentary docuseries idea, again, think big picture IP of some sort, or you have some footage or a teaser that you can kind of show that shows personalities that you know is going to get interest, and approaching the production companies or pods that are working with the streamers.
Right. If selling a book option, what are the top things to watch out for if you have interest from a studio?
Well, I would say, first off, like it's really thinking about how long they have it for and what rights they get, which is somewhat the same as the movie we were talking about before, right? Like, do they get sequels, prequels? Do they get a say in what your sequels or prequels are going to be as a novelist? And do they get automatic first rights to do them or not? And what if you decide to do a spin-off character, right? That's another big thing. Do they have ownership of that or a say in that? And you may be okay giving up that ownership or say because it's such a big company that it's okay, but it's having to think through all those things. And then like how you're getting paid and how you're staying involved. Like we have one deal where the author of the book is listed as a consultant, and we have another one where the author of the book is an executive producer on the show. So you have to understand like what you want and obviously what you're getting paid. That's kind of like blatant. You need to think of how you're getting paid and on how much on each episode and what the expectations are there. And then like the turnaround and or extension fees, right? Because usually they'll say, I want 12 months to develop this, and if it doesn't, I want to pay you another X amount to develop it for another 12 months, and if that doesn't, what happens, right? So trying to think through with your attorney, what are the options that you care about in that front and what you're going to do. I always say too, if you're selling it to a studio, you need to also, because a lot of the time they don't want to buy it for just TV or just film. They want to buy it with an opportunity to do whatever they want with it. So going into it knowing that too is important. And like, so we tend to negotiate, this is what happens if you do it for TV, and this is what happens if you do it for film. So that's all sorted out. And even podcasts too, right? Like maybe they'll do a podcast first and then it turns into a series. So sorting all of that out also. Those are the big things that come to mind.
Okay, and this question says, I'm a first-time feature director, but I have interest from well-known talent. Are pre-sales a realistic option for me or any strategies in this regard?
It could be depending on who the talent is and what your budget is. It is very nuanced to that, right? Like if your talent is worthy enough and you're a first-time feature director and your budget's not too crazy for a first-time feature director, it could be worth it. But I've had some times where, again, people are giving me like a B-level talent, they want to do it for $6 million and it's their first feature, that's a harder sell. So I would say it depends on what that looks like. But let's just say it's good level talent, maybe it's a B, you're a first-time feature director and you want to do this between a $1 to $1.5 million budget, yeah, pre-sales could be possible. And then there, take that and kind of take the nuance to it of where you're at. But just because you're a first-time feature director does not mean you can't pre-sell. You just have to have the right cast, producer, and team behind you to help beef you up.
See, and okay, so does the law firm negotiate the contracts? Do they ever act as a packager, getting people attached to a project, pitching, selling, etc.?
So that is what I do. I'm not an attorney. I run the packaging and sales arm of the firm. So the answer is yes. I will say that our firm tends to be more what I call business-oriented packaging. So I'm not, unless we're making financial offers to talent or they have their own production company, I don't approach talent. I more focus on who are other producers, co-pro, EP, sales agents, distributor partners to approach.
Okay.
But there are other law firms out there that there's not that many that do what we do, but there are a handful that are kind of nuanced of what we do, and they might be more willing to approach talent if that's what you need.
Got it. So in that sense, I know you mentioned you are not in that part of the firm, but usually do you guys mostly get material that is pitched to you, or do you also go out there and try to find? And if you do, where do you go to find this perfect project?
I would say like the majority of projects are pitched to me. There are some projects that I take on in a deeper level, and some of those come to me, and some of them are like articles I've read or books that we've read that we wanted to get the rights to ourselves.
Okay. Do distributors or sales agents want creative control?
That depends on what they're doing for you and how involved they are. So the answer can be yes, and it can be no. Unfortunately, it's pretty broad in that way. But there's like streamers like Netflix, we're going to want to have some creative control sometimes, and then there are other ones where they bought a movie that's done and there's no creative control. So it can vary.
All right, and I know you mentioned other streamers, smaller streamers like shorter.
Mhm.
And there's some interest in knowing the budget that streamer usually works with.
I don't know their cap, but I believe they're typically sitting in the 1.5 to $3 million budget space. There's probably some nuance to that, but that's what I've seen that they're funding.
All right. And for the distribution fee, is there usually a range, a percentage that is like across the industry?
Yeah, like I said, it can be anywhere between 25 to 50%, depending on the platform, right? Like maybe theatrical is more 50% versus digital is more 25. And some distributors break it up like that, and some distributors do a blanket percentage. But I would say like 25 to 35% tends to be more of the norm that I see.
See, and what is an example of a deal a writer producer will make with a company like yours to represent and become an executive producer? What kind of fee would you reasonably charge?
I mean, like, I typically work on an hourly basis, but there are times where I'll come in and like be more involved as an EP, like I did on Chick Fight, or like I've done on a couple of others that we have on post now. It's a hard question to answer because my fee can vary depending on who it is and what we're bringing in. Like if I'm bringing in half the financing, I'm obviously going to expect a different level of involvement than I am if I'm bringing in 10% of the financing, or if I'm bringing in, if I help develop it for years, I'm going to have a different goal for it than I would if I'm just plugging in a sales agent. So it's varying, so sorry, that one's also hard to answer.
All right, and does your firm prefer for creatives to be signed with one of your attorneys before reaching out to someone in the packaging and sales team?
No, we can work together and we can work separately. So I always say, like, if you have your own attorney, and we can help you, great. If you need one of our attorneys here, I don't need to help you, great. If you need both of us, great. We're really open as long as the synergy is there.
Right. And it seems like you mentioned an NFT before, and they're wondering what that is.
NFT, I forget what the acronym is for, but I don't know if everybody's heard about how there's like this art that is selling digitally online for like, some of it's going for like millions of dollars, but it's all online digital, like almost like Bitcoiny. And I've never done it, but I know that it's starting to enter distribution agreements. So that's what I'm talking about. I'm just going to see here if I can find the acronym real quick for you. What it stands for. And it doesn't come up quickly, but it's basically, I think it's non-fungible token, or I don't know, but basically it's like a bunch of people are going on and like selling pictures or memes online and things like that for like millions of dollars, and they're making a lot of money that way. And there's a lot of, like, I had a call with an investor over at AFM who does stuff in film, but he's also starting to get in the NFT world, and he's basically saying, like, if you have past films, you can create art with them because NFTs aren't in a bunch of old distribution contracts, and then you can sell them on this and like make money, even though it might also be with a distributor. So it is a thing, but I'm sorry, I don't remember what it stands for.
Yeah, no, you were right. It's non-fungible token. That's what he was.
Okay.
And how do you, okay, so this is probably for, there's a lot of screenwriters today, and they're asking, how do you even get the attention of a production company when they don't accept unsolicited material?
It's really difficult. I feel your pain. It's really difficult. I say, again, like trying to find agent, a manager, an attorney who is willing to take you out, friends that can get you in, and networking. Like, I know it's really difficult to network in the middle of a pandemic, or if you're living in an area where there's just not as many people that are in the space. But there's these, you know, what I think is really cool, and I've even touted this on Stage 32 before, of like, first off, you're doing Stage 32 networking events or things like that where you can meet people, but then a lot of these festivals now, because of COVID, are creating more online platforms where you can watch movies digitally and be a part of panels digitally and like meet people in greeting rooms and things like that digitally. And the cost of that is a lot cheaper than having to fly and pay for a badge and all these things. You just pay for an online badge, which tends to be a little cheaper, and you can do those things. So that's one way. And then sometimes, you know, it's just kindly having, I say it's like being kindly annoying, right? Like, even if they're like, we don't take unsolicited, depending on how badly you want to get into that specific production company, you know, just being like kindly trying to get their feedback, or saying, is there any way, and let them tell you how to get it in, because they might come back to you and say, we don't take unsolicited. Okay, that's a blanket comment. I don't know what to do with that. Okay, you don't take unsolicited. What are ways that I can send this to you? Can you give me that, like, what would I need to be able to send this to you? Is it an attorney? Is it an agent? And they'll give you those answers sometimes, and then you can try and go through and get that for yourself and send it through. Like, I do have some clients that are very self-sufficient, and they'll only use me when somebody says no unsolicited, and then I'm the one sending it off with them copied and things like that. And then there's, you know, some who use me for more than that, but that is a good avenue to try and come back at them and say, okay, you won't take it from me like this, but how can you take it? And that's at least getting a response going. You have an email chain, hopefully, or at least a conversation, but typically I prefer an email chain so it's like in written form, so they can refer back to it, because they get so much unsolicited, they probably won't remember. And then looping in whoever you do too, if you have another attorney or somebody who can send it on your behalf.
Okay, and the last question for today is going to be about if you see any preference in genres lately. And I know it's constantly switching, but what are you seeing lately as a trend?
Preferences in genres?
Yeah.
So I think that action, thriller, horror, that's not like too gross, are pretty consistent and have been consistent for a while. In being strong. I think the one thing that I've noticed pop up since about a year to 3 months ago, is comedy. A lot of people are just kind of finding like comedy is what people want. People don't want to be depressed. People don't want to be sad. They want to have fun. So that's taking an uptick, which I think is really nice. Sci-fi can still do well. Again, it depends on how big the world is and really the access points and the underlying IP. And then the other thing that I think is really great that's happening is, like, in all of those genres, diverse content is also really shining right now. And that can be diverse in you know, the LGBTQ+ community, the disabilities community, any minorities. So like, I think it's really, that's something where it doesn't need to fit in a genre if the content's really well done. But you know, if you have a story to tell that's in that kind of base, that's something that I'm seeing do really well also.
Love it. And before I let everyone go, Tiffany, I want to ask you to leave everyone with some parting words of advice. We know how hard this industry is and how sometimes it's hard to stay motivated. So what's the last piece of advice that you have for everyone in the room?
I think my advice would be, it can be a really long road. Like she said, it can be really difficult. It can be hard. And I've said this before, I'll say it again, not to you today, but I've said it many times, is I hear no every single day. And that's okay, right? Like I've had projects where I've been taking them out for a year to 2 years, and then finally somebody bites. And that's with like me being able to get through to people, right? And so I'm not saying you need to try something forever, because it'll definitely happen, but I'm also saying that just because it doesn't happen right away doesn't mean it won't. And if your project is good and you keep honing it and you're open to notes and you keep, you know, like pushing your passion, people see passion and they see good work. And if maybe, like I've had clients, I have a great story of one woman that I worked with where we had pitched Netflix for a TV series, and we had been taking this project everywhere. Everybody liked the project, but they just weren't taking it on. And everyone was like, oh, it's such a good project. It's just not for us. They had no complaints about it. And it was really frustrating. And like 3 months after she did that pitch to them, she got a call from Netflix that was like, we want to hire you to do this other project with, I can't say who, but like somebody huge. And that's what she's doing now. She's writing for this other project with that huge person. And so just because it doesn't work out for this specific project doesn't mean that, like, you have to think about, I am taking my relationships that I'm building for this, and if it doesn't happen for this, I'm going to keep my relationships with those people, keep them positive, because there might be something in the future with something else.
Well, what a great way to end the webinar. And we at Stage 32 just want to thank you once again for giving your time and knowledge on such an important topic for our community. And thank you to the amazing audience today for being part of Stage 32 Next Level webinar. We look forward to bringing you more webinars like this in the future. And don't forget to share what you learned today on social media at Stage 32 on Twitter and Instagram. And yeah, thank you again and have a great day and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.